The 9 o'clock news from the BBC with Julia Somerville and Andrew Harvey.
An MP's been told 6 alleged Nazi war criminals are still alive and living in Britain.
The abortion case, the father loses his appeal. His solicitor talks tonight.
Last-minute reprieve for the Tamils. The High Court will hear their case.
The Employment Secretary proposes new laws to change the way unions conduct their affairs.
And how AIDS could cut the number of people having skin grafts. Good evening. A committee of MPs has tonight disclosed that there are 6 suspected Nazi war criminals living in Britain, and there may be 2 more. They've been traced by the Home Office, but they've been told they cannot be prosecuted in this country. Among them are men alleged to have committed atrocities in Lithuania during the Second World War. One of the MPs, Greville Janner, said tonight that, to his knowledge, it was the first time the Home Office had made such an announcement, and he'd be pressing for more information in Parliament.
A Home Office investigation was launched after the Nazi-hunting Wiesenthal Institute sent the Prime Minister evidence against 17 alleged war criminals said to be living in Britain.
I know that the list of the 17 are people from the Baltic countries. They was involved in crimes in the Baltic countries, and the list will be in the possession tomorrow of the Consul General of United Kingdom.
The Home Secretary says that of the 17 alleged war criminals, 6 are alive and living in Britain, though exactly where is not being disclosed. 2 are presumed dead, 3 are known to be dead, and there's no trace of the remaining 6. The Home Secretary was meeting the all-party war crimes group at Westminster. Among that group was an MP who's already used parliamentary privilege to name an Edinburgh man as head of a Lithuanian death squad. Mr. Janner, who are these alleged war criminals?
They are alleged to be people who were directly or indirectly involved in genocide, in mass murders of civilians, in the killing of Jews and of non-Jews in the Soviet Union, or what is now the Soviet Union, whether in the SS or in Lithuania or other forces, but killers.
How much more is known about them?
Well, we now know from the Home Secretary today that of the 17 names produced by the Simon Wiesenthal Centre, 6 are definitely alive and living in this country, 2 are probably alive and here, 3 are dead, and 6 have not yet been traced. This is the first time that I know of that we've been told specifically that alleged Nazi war criminals are living here in the United Kingdom.
Do you know who they are, and if not, will you be finding out very quickly?
We have the list. We don't know who the 6 are whom the Home Office have found to be alive. I would be surprised if members of Parliament do not press the Home Secretary very hard to produce those names and to take such action as he can.
Now, you're a lawyer. What can be done?
There are a number of possibilities. One is that if British citizenship was obtained by these people as a result of fraud or deception, the Home Secretary has the power to remove that citizenship. That is his discretion, and then they may be deported. There is the possibility of prosecution in the United Kingdom. This is subject to some complex legal problems, whether or not they have to be British subjects at the time that the crime was committed. There's the possibility of extradition, but certainly they should not be allowed to sleep quietly and peacefully in their beds here.
However, the Home Secretary told the all-party group that after taking legal advice, there could be no prosecutions in this country, and deportation or withdrawal of citizenship would be difficult, if not impossible.
Mike Smart reporting. An Oxford student has lost his court battle to stop his ex-girlfriend having an abortion, and the operation is now likely to go ahead on Thursday. This morning, the Court of Appeal upheld yesterday's High Court ruling against him, and this afternoon 3 law lords said he couldn't challenge that decision. The baby was conceived between 18 and 21 weeks ago, and the argument centred on whether it could be born alive.
The application for a court injunction preventing the abortion relied heavily on a 1929 Act of Parliament forbidding the abortion of a child capable of being born alive. And in the appeal court today, both the argument against the abortion and the judgment which said that it could go ahead concentrated on those words. Mr. Gerard Wright, QC, said that the word dead meant showing no signs of life, while at between 18 and 21 weeks old, a fetus already had a heartbeat and was showing real and discernible signs of life. But the Master of the Rolls, Sir John Donaldson, said that despite that, the fetus could not breathe, naturally or on a ventilator. It could not breathe and never would be able to. And in the opinion of the three judges, if the fetus had reached the normal stage of development, it was not capable of being born alive within the meaning of the Act. By the 18th week, the unborn child has already taken on a recognisable human form. Its heart, which begins to form very early in the pregnancy, is already beginning its lifetime's work. Limbs, hands and feet are well on their way to development, and the unborn child's mouth gives expression to a face on which the eyes have not yet opened. But the respiratory system is not yet working. The three judges did not approve of the decision to take the appeal on to the House of Lords. Sir John said that all three judges were astonished at the attitude of the local health authority, which had said it would not go ahead with the abortion so long as an appeal to the House of Lords was in the offing. In the normal course of events, he said, in matters of urgency, the appeal court was the final court, and nobody could be blamed or prosecuted for acting on its judgment. The purpose of the Supreme Court, the House of Lords, he said, was to consider matters historically, on a broader basis, and not to consider matters of great urgency which had to be decided once and for all. Tonight in Manchester, a solicitor representing the unborn child's father talked about his client's motives in pressing his case all the way to the House of Lords.
He is aware of just how human this little child is, that the heart is beating, that indeed at this stage it will be moving around. And he has a very strong sense of fatherhood, notwithstanding that he's not married to the mother. And he feels it's his duty to do whatever he can to try to save the child.
The father's case, as we've heard, was based on the argument that this abortion would be a criminal offence under the Infant Life Preservation Act of 1929. That act makes it a crime to destroy a child who's capable of being born alive. But with the defeat of his case, where does the law on abortion stand now? Well, a short time ago, I spoke to the BBC's legal correspondent, Joshua Rosenberg.
The father in this case was using a new legal argument that hadn't been tried before. He was arguing that the 1929 Act was a sort of loophole, a way of getting round the Abortion Act. Now, that argument had never been tried before and failed in the High Court, the Court of Appeal and the House of Lords. What it means is that that argument can no longer be used as a way of preventing somebody from having an abortion, even though the fetus is much less than 28 weeks old.
So in future, if the law on abortion is to be changed, how will that be done?
That's clearly going to be a matter for Parliament. I think the courts were being invited to extend the law to show that the 1929 Act did prevent the Abortion Act being used in circumstances where it had been used in the past, but the courts refused to take up the challenge that the father tried in that case, and it's now going to be a matter for Parliament if there is to be any change in the abortion law.
58 Tamils from Sri Lanka who are facing deportation from Britain have won the right to challenge their expulsion. The group, who say they risk persecution if they return home, were last week refused refugee status in Britain. This morning, the High Court heard lawyers acting for the Tamils argue that the Home Office had made procedural errors in refusing to grant asylum. By lunchtime, before the court had ruled, the 58 had been taken to Heathrow Airport, ready for a flight to Bangladesh later in the day. But this afternoon, Lord Justice May and two other judges ruled that there were sufficient grounds for a judicial review of the case. At 5 o'clock, the flight to Bangladesh left without the Tamils. They'll probably be allowed to stay in Britain until the review is completed. This evening, 2 coachloads of Tamils arrived at a detention centre in Derbyshire.
Fearing time might be fast running out for the 58 detainees, Tamil sympathisers lined the pavement outside the High Court. Any Home Office expulsion, they claimed, would mean persecution and torture for those sent back home. Last week, some of those the government wanted removed immediately stripped down to their underpants as they were about to be put aboard a plane to Bangladesh. The Home Secretary had said they were not genuine refugees and had arrived with forged documents. But the Tamils Council claimed the Home Office had broken its own rules by denying them the right of appeal to the UK Immigrants Advisory Service. While the judges were listening to that argument today, the Home Office had already transported the Tamils back to the airport for a second time. Ready, it's thought, to put them on tonight's flight to Dhaka, their last port of call before arriving in Britain. Their solicitor was furious.
I think it must be extremely distressing for the people who are involved. I mean, there are women and children on those coaches. We believe, in fact, that there's at least one pregnant woman, or so I'm told. I mean, this must be a very distressing experience, and one has to ask oneself, why is it like this?
Then news reached the Tamil demonstrators that the judges had decided there were sufficient grounds to allow the Tamils to challenge the Home Office order in the High Court.
The Home Office were refused leave to appeal against today's judgment, which means they'll now have to account to the High Court for the way they handled the Tamils case. Although they could still expel them from the country before the judicial review, that seems unlikely. And they've now given an undertaking that no such removal will take place without giving the Tamils a clear 24-hour notice.
Some of the Tamils detained say they're terrified of what might yet happen. One of them told a colleague he didn't want to be identified, but was in no doubt about why he'd come to Britain.
No, I have come to this place to save our lives, especially my wife, son, daughter, and myself. And in Sri Lanka, I have lost my house and everything due to the aerial bombing, naval shelling, and the army land shelling. And I lost one of my relatives also recently.
Tonight, the 58 Tamils were again taken back from the airport. The women and children are now behind the fences of Harmondsworth, just a mile from Heathrow. The men driven 150 miles northwards to Foston Hall Detention Centre in Derbyshire.
At the Old Bailey, two 15-year-old youths have been cleared of murdering Constable Keith Blakelock after the judge directed the jury to acquit them. PC Blakelock was killed during riots on the Broadwater Farm estate at Tottenham in North London 2 years ago. One of the youths still faces charges of riot and affray. 4 others are charged with PC Blakelock's murder.
The judge, Mr. Justice Hodgson, directed the jury to acquit the 2 youths after hearing detailed legal arguments by their defence counsel. The first youth, who was 13 at the time of the murder of PC Blakelock, walked free from the court smiling, accompanied by his parents and friends. The other youth, also 15, was cleared of murder, but still faces charges of riot and affray. The jury were absent during the legal argument, but the judge told them, as a matter of law and for reasons which don't concern you, evidence of the interviews with the first youth and evidence regarding him is inadmissible. It is therefore my duty to direct you to find him not guilty on all 3 counts. According to the prosecution, the freed youth was the one who had described seeing PC Blakelock hacked to death by a mob who attempted to cut off his head and place it on a pole, an allegation the youth himself later vehemently denied. The prosecution today finished presenting their case. Of the 5 remaining defendants, 4 are still accused of murder and riot and affray.
Mike Mackay. The government's chief medical officer is giving doctors new guidelines on AIDS after a patient contracted the virus when he was given a skin graft. Sir Donald Acheson warns doctors they must ensure all tissue transplants are tested for AIDS. The man who became infected was being treated for serious burns at a hospital in London. It's the first time anyone has caught AIDS this way. As a result, there's less skin available now for grafting operations because the hospital is using only the patient's own skin or that of a close relative. It's also having to reassure hundreds of worried patients alarmed by what's happened.
The patient was treated for burns at Queen Mary's Hospital in southwest London. He needed a temporary graft of skin, so surgeons used some spare skin left over from a previous burns patient. They didn't realise the skin contained the AIDS virus. It had been tested, but the results were not available. The test itself takes only a matter of hours, but the blood sample for testing had to be sent away. Today, the surgeon told me that under the guidelines then in force, a positive test had to be repeated for confirmation at the Public Health Laboratory at Colindale in North London. It took a month for the final and confirmed result to be sent back to the hospital. Meanwhile, the surgeon had carried out the graft and the patient had become infected. The surgeon said that since the incident, the hospital has tightened up its procedures. Doctors there now won't use skin from unrelated donors. This has caused some problems, but the hospital believes the risk of infecting someone with AIDS is too great to allow them to use donor skin, about which they're unsure. Even if skin or other donor organs are tested, the AIDS test is not foolproof.
There are anxiety is beginning to arise about the possibility of new AIDS viruses, and tests for these are not yet available in this country. So one has to be aware that the tests that we use are not an absolute 100% protection.
Whenever any type of tissue is going to be used, coming from somebody else, as a temporary dressing or whatever, it must always be tested in advance, and that's the advice we're going to issue in future.
There have been other cases where a kidney transplant has infected a patient. It's happened in America. Doctors hope that if surgeons stick strictly to the government's guidelines, it won't happen again.
The Prime Minister has said she intends to cut income tax further, but only at a pace dictated by prudence. She told the Institute of Directors that Britain's industrial base was healthier than at any time for at least a generation. And lower income tax was an incentive to higher growth. But her comments have been criticised in the Commons by Labour MPs.
3,500 people filled the Albert Hall for the Institute of Directors' annual meeting. The theme, Reskilling Britain, or how to retrain workers and managers to meet new circumstances and new technologies. They heard Rover Group chairman Graham Day saying Britain's education system wasn't providing the pool of management talent that industry needs. It was the Prime Minister they'd come to hear, and they got an upbeat speech listing achievements so far, but giving away little about the future.
We have reduced income tax, and we've made quite clear our intention to reduce it further. But we can only do that at the pace dictated by prudence. Now, there are some who suggest that it is wrong to want to reduce income tax further. I believe it is wrong for the state to take and spend so much of people's earnings that they are left with too little to provide for their own families and to save for their own future. We believe the citizen is entitled to keep the lion's share of his earnings.
This was preaching to the converted, and the Prime Minister was applauded loudly by one of her most sympathetic audiences. Later in the Commons, when she repeated a similar message, Labour's Shadow Chancellor Roy Hattersley said she was describing an economy which none of us can recognise. He said irresponsible tax cuts aimed solely at electoral popularity would fuel a growing balance of payments crisis.
The government is planning more laws to change the way trade unions work. The Employment Secretary, Lord Young, announced the plans today. They'll be implemented after the next election if the Conservatives win. He said they're intended to restore and reinforce union democracy. The reforms would include an end to closed shops, even when a majority of members favour it, all union leaders to be elected by ballot every 5 years, a new Commissioner for Trade Union Affairs to help members take action against their union, and measures to protect union members who decide to work through a strike.
It's the lessons of the miners' strike which are behind a great many of today's proposals. The NUM members who successfully took their union to court would in future have advice and funds from a new Commissioner for Trade Union Affairs, and they'd have the right to inspect the union's books, as would members of another union who had supported a union on strike. And there would be new rules for union executive committees. Even secretaries and presidents who can't vote would now have to be elected by postal ballot every 5 years. So is that an attack on Mr. Scargill, whose union has removed both his vote and his need to stand for election, until now?
Mr. Scargill would be one of those affected, along with, I think, people like Rodney Bickerstaff, Ken Gill, other people who are effectively leading figures in their trade union, but are not at the moment subject to re-election by their membership because they don't formally have a vote on the executive. The whole point of the elections was to make the leadership really responsible to their own members.
Whoppings also had an effect. Unions would now be liable if they disciplined any strikebreaker, whether the strike was lawful or not.
Here we have a situation in which we're going to have regulation and overseers of the trade union movement from a government which has done absolutely nothing about the appalling scandals in the City of London, where some of the biggest crooks in the world are operating, and yet we are told that they should be allowed to self-regulate themselves, whereas trade unions are to be regulated by government diktat. I think that is the one that sticks in the craw the most.
Our view would be very much that if they go this way without any corresponding extension of workers' rights and the right to be consulted, then they do risk looking a little bit heavy-handed with the trade unions, and we think that would be unfortunate because actually union and management relations are improving, and indeed, as the government said, the strike records are better.
The unions now have 2 months to respond before the government think about legislation, if an election allows.
An all-party committee of MPs has recommended that British coal should no longer have a monopoly on developing new mines. The Commons Energy Committee has ruled out privatisation in the foreseeable future, but it says British coal must consider working with private companies to develop new pits, and it says the government should give more help to communities affected by pit closures.
Some news just in. A Sea King helicopter has crashed into the sea between St Austell and Falmouth. It's understood that 3 people were on board. The helicopter was from the Royal Naval Air Station at Culdrose in Cornwall.
Labour is still ahead in the Greenwich by-election, according to the latest opinion poll, with the Alliance close behind. The real poll is on Thursday, and the result in what could be general election year has great significance for the 3 main parties. Our political editor John Cole reports.
Starting from 3rd place, the Alliance have sailed into Greenwich, determined to win the seat for Rosie Barnes. In this knife-edge by-election, the classic third-party squeeze, which tormented the Liberals for many years, is helping the Alliance and hurting the Conservatives.
Your SDP Liberal Alliance candidate, Rosie Barnes.
The heart of their campaign is an appeal to Tory voters to desert their own man in order to stop Labour.
Thank you for the poster.
On the doorsteps, the Alliance attack on the hard-left Labour image in London peeled off a huge early lead. Now the Labour vote seems to have hardened, and Rosie Barnes is turning her charm on Conservatives.
Eyes down for a full house.
Labour's Deirdre Wood shrugs off her hard left tag with a campaign that's as British as Bingo and Fergie. More pensioners live here than elsewhere, and her jolly approach seems to please people she's met during years of local campaigning on down-to-earth issues like pedestrian crossings and housing improvements. But on big council estates, what divides voters most is the Deirdre factor, and whether she represents the kind of Labour Party a traditional Labour area wants. One supporter had no doubts.
And as for gay rights, that's just a minor detail that we're not worried about by any stretch of the imagination. We don't even think about that. We are more interested in what is done for the borough, the tenants, and we're extremely happy with the Greenwich Labour Party. They've done us proud.
Glenys Kinnock, like her husband, knows that in politics there are no silver medals for runners-up, and Deirdre Wood's hoping the media's grim-faced picture of her will be softened by personal contact. Michael Heseltine got time to know the enemy before adding a touch of polish to a flagging Conservative campaign.
Just missed last time by 1,200. One last push, we're going to do it.
John Antcliffe knows his government's a bit ahead nationally, but local polls tell him his votes are eroding to the Alliance. The cruel irony is that the Tory policy of selling council houses may not bring the political harvest to them in Greenwich. Labour will lose the votes of some new owners, but will that help John Antcliffe on polling day?
If I can get some inclination it's going to be tight, and John's behind Rosie Barnes, then I shall vote for Rosie Barnes.
In this seesawing campaign, the decisive factor will be how many more Conservatives jump ship to the Alliance. The result here will offer an important compass bearing ahead of the general election. If Labour holds on, Neil Kinnock will face it with growing confidence. If the Alliance wins, David Owen will have emerged from a bleak winter into a brighter spring. Neither result would encourage the Prime Minister to call an early election.
And there are 5 other candidates standing in the by-election. They are Graham Bell, Ian Dell, Malcolm Hardy, Kate Marshall and Joe Pearce. And voting is on Thursday.
And tonight's main news again. The Home Office has traced 6 alleged Nazi war criminals still in Britain. MP Greville Janner claims it's the first time the Home Office has said there are war criminals living here.
The law lords have ruled that an Oxford University student cannot stop his former girlfriend having an abortion.
And that's the national and international news tonight.